Amber's smirk faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, leaning back with a condescending shrug. "Oh, I'm sure. Some of us don't have to scrape by waiting tables." Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from today. If this is your first time discovering the channel, or if you haven't subscribed yet, please support us by hitting the subscribe button. It really means a lot to us. Thank you all so much. The night was heavy, darkened by storm clouds that rumbled like distant drums, building in intensity as rain began to pound against the roof of Nathan Caldwell's grand estate. The light from the house slashed through the rain-soaked darkness, illuminating the driveway where clothes, shoes, and shattered memories lay scattered in chaotic disarray. Nathan's face, set like stone, was visible under the glow from the porch light as he threw another handful of Olivia's belongings into the damp night, the leather handles of her favorite suitcase twisting under his grip before landing with a muted thud against the concrete. "Get out." His voice sliced through the night, harsh and final, the edge of anger unmistakable. "I'm done with you, Olivia." In the doorway, Olivia stood frozen, her face pale as she clutched a raincoat against her chest. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, locked onto Nathan's, searching for any trace of the man who'd held her only hours before, whispering about their plans for a 15th anniversary trip. She blinked back tears, her voice quivering. "Nathan, please, what's going on? Talk to me." Her words hung in the air like the last chords of a song, fragile and desperate. But Nathan didn't flinch. His expression was a wall she couldn't breach, cold and impenetrable. 15 years, Olivia, he said, his voice a low growl, "and what do I have to show for it? Nothing. No heir, no family. If you found our story today interesting, please comment greatly helpful. If you find the story not interesting, please comment need more drama." The words cut deep, piercing through Olivia's heart like shards of glass. She'd always known how much Nathan longed for a child, but his love for her had always seemed stronger than that unfulfilled desire, or so she'd thought. Memories flooded her mind, their wedding day, the laughter they'd shared, the warmth of their early years. But now, those moments felt as distant as the fading echoes of thunder. "Nathan," she whispered, barely able to breathe, "is that really why you're doing this?" He didn't answer, but his eyes told her everything she needed to know. A storm raged inside him, fueled by resentment and unmet dreams, and there was no room left for her in its wake. Then, from the shadows of the house, a figure emerged, a young woman with a radiant, calculated smile. She walked toward Nathan with a sway of confidence, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. "Nathan, baby," she cooed, her voice dripping with sweetness, "is everything okay? I was worried when you didn't show up for our dinner." "Amber." Nathan's assistant. "No," Olivia corrected herself, "not just his assistant." Olivia's heart sank as she took in the sight before her. Amber standing at Nathan's side, fingers interlocked with his, looking every bit like she belonged there. The young woman turned her gaze to Olivia, a smirk playing at her lips as she spoke. "I thought you should know," Amber said with mock innocence. "I'm pregnant. I'll take good care of him, Olivia, and our baby. Something you couldn't give him." A chill swept over Olivia, colder than the raindrops pelting her shoulders. She opened her mouth to respond, but words failed her. The truth was staring her in the face, too raw, too painful to deny. She could feel her world unraveling, each thread of her life pulled apart by the betrayal before her. Nathan's eyes, steely and unyielding, bore into her. "Amber's giving me what you never could, Olivia. I'm moving on." The finality of his words struck her like a blow, leaving her gasping for air as she clutched her raincoat tighter. She fought to maintain some shred of dignity, though her voice betrayed her pain as she spoke. "You'll regret this, Nathan," she warned, her tone quiet but steady. The storm outside had nothing on the fury beginning to smolder within her, a force both fragile and fierce. She turned, forcing herself to walk away, each step a painful reminder of the life she was leaving behind, each memory dissolving in the pouring rain. She didn't look back. There was nothing left for her in that house, nothing but shadows and broken promises. As she disappeared into the night, the house stood silent, looming like a monument to all they'd built together. The rain swallowed her retreating form, and Nathan felt an odd, hollow pang in his chest as he watched her vanish. But Amber was by his side, her arm wrapping around him, her lips brushing his cheek in a promise of a new beginning. "Come on, Nathan," she whispered, her voice as soothing as silk. "We have a future to plan." But as he looked back at the empty driveway, the remnants of Olivia's life strewn across it, an uneasy feeling twisted in his gut, a flicker of doubt that gnawed at him even as Amber pulled him inside, the door closing with a resolute click that echoed in the silence. The rain hadn't let up as Olivia trudged down the deserted street. the echoes of her past life trailing her like faint whispers. Her hands were numb, but not from the cold. It was the emptiness, the sudden nothingness that wrapped around her like a shroud. The house, the security, the plans she'd made with Nathan, all of it felt like a distant dream now, a cruel mirage vanishing into the night. She clenched her fists, refusing to give in to the sob rising in her throat, and reminded herself to breathe, one shaky inhale at a time. Every few steps, her mind wandered back to Amber's parting words, taunting her in the dark, "I'll take care of him and our baby." Something you couldn't give him. They echoed, relentless and sharp, each word a reminder of the rejection that had taken root in Nathan's heart. A whirlwind of emotions swirled within her, pain, betrayal, and anger, so thick she could almost taste it. But underneath it all, there was something else too, a glimmer of defiance she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't sure where she was going or what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: she would not let Amber or Nathan break her spirit. As the days passed, Olivia wandered from friend to friend, searching for a place to stay, but found only cold sympathy and closed doors. Nathan had always been her anchor, her steady foundation, and without him, she felt like a ship adrift, battered by waves she wasn't prepared to face alone. It wasn't until she stumbled upon a women's shelter that she finally found a small measure of peace: a room with a narrow bed, a shared bathroom, and the kindness of strangers who offered her warmth without judgment. In the days that followed, Olivia learned to adjust to her new life, each moment a quiet act of resilience. She found a rhythm in the daily chores, the clinking of dishes, and the hum of voices around her. The shelter became her sanctuary, a place where she could piece together the fragments of her heart, stitch by stitch, even if it felt fragile and imperfect. But even in her quiet moments, the past lingered at the edges of her thoughts, refusing to fade away. One morning, as she stood by the window watching the rain pelt down in relentless sheets, Olivia felt a strange queasiness. It was subtle at first, just a faint churning in her stomach, but it quickly grew into waves of nausea that left her doubled over, clutching the windowsill for support. Her mind raced, a flurry of thoughts she couldn't quite place, until the realization hit her like a thunderclap: she was pregnant. The truth settled over her like a heavy weight, mingling with a newfound resolve she hadn't known she possessed. He will never know, she thought, her hand instinctively resting over her stomach. This child was hers, a tiny spark of life that was untouched by the bitterness that now defined her past with Nathan. She would protect it fiercely, nurture it with everything she had, even if it meant facing the world alone. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia searched tirelessly for work, scanning every notice board, knocking on doors, and filling out countless applications. The city felt daunting, each rejection a reminder of the privilege she'd once taken for granted. But her resolve didn't waver. She was determined to rebuild, piece by piece, if only to prove to herself and perhaps to Nathan that she was capable of standing on her own. It was during one of her endless rounds of job applications that she found herself outside a restaurant, LeBlanc, its gleaming windows and the savory scent of fresh bread drawing her in. She stepped inside, her heart pounding as she approached the hostess stand. A friendly face behind the counter greeted her, and before she knew it, she was sitting in front of the head chef, Sarah, who looked at her with a mixture of kindness and curiosity. "So," Sarah said, studying Olivia with a knowing smile, "ever worked as a server before?" "No," Olivia admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "But I'm willing to learn. I need this job, for myself and my baby." There was a moment of silence, thick with unspoken words. Sarah's eyes softened and she nodded slowly. "Well, if you're serious, we can give you a trial shift. It's not easy work, but I've got a feeling you'll do just fine." And so, Olivia began her new life at LeBlanc. The work was grueling, each shift a test of endurance as she navigated trays of steaming dishes and long hours on her feet. But there was a satisfaction in it too, a quiet pride in each completed task, each smile she coaxed from a weary diner. She was building something, fragile though it might be, and that sense of purpose filled her with a determination she hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Nathan's life seemed to flourish in her absence. News of his business successes spread, each article lauding his strategic brilliance, his ambition, and his drive. His friend Marcus tried to temper Nathan's growing arrogance, warning him of the dangers of unchecked ambition, but Nathan dismissed his concerns with a confident wave. "What's the point of having power if you don't use it?" Nathan replied with a smirk. "I didn't come this far just to play it safe." But as the months wore on, his confidence grew into hubris. He spent his days overseeing the relentless expansion of his empire, and his nights basking in the glow of Amber's admiration, reveling in the wealth and power he'd accumulated. Yet, in those rare quiet moments, a strange hollowness gnawed at him. an emptiness that Amber's presence couldn't quite fill. One evening, as Amber prattled on about her plans for their child, Nathan's mind wandered, drawn inexplicably back to Olivia. A flash of her face, tear-streaked and defiant, haunted him, a reminder of a life he'd so readily discarded. He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. What was past was past. He had a new life now, one that was better suited to his ambitions. Yet fate, it seemed, had a different plan. As the months rolled by, Olivia's belly grew, a quiet testament to her resilience and determination. She worked through the nausea, the exhaustion, and the aching feet, her heart lifted by the knowledge that she was building something real, something that couldn't be taken away. She made friends among the other servers and earned the respect of Sarah, who praised her work ethic with a warm smile and a nod of approval. "You're doing great, Olivia," Sarah said one evening, her eyes crinkling with pride. "Keep it up." And for the first time in months, Olivia allowed herself to smile, a real, unguarded smile that felt like the first hint of sunshine after a long, dark winter. But life, Olivia knew, was unpredictable. The real test would come when she least expected it, a moment that would force her to confront the past she'd tried so hard to leave behind. It was a night like any other when Nathan and Amber walked into LeBlanc, hand in hand, their laughter echoing across the room as they took a seat at one of the corner tables. Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat as she recognized them, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She wanted to turn, to flee, to disappear before they saw her, but it was too late. Amber's gaze landed on her, and a slow, smile spread across her face. Well, Amber drawled, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "If it isn't the ex-Mrs. Caldwell waiting tables now." Olivia met her gaze head-on, the fire in her eyes blazing with quiet defiance. "I prefer to think of it as honest work, Mrs. Caldwell." Amber's face twisted into a scowl, but Nathan's expression was different: shock, disbelief, and something else, something that looked suspiciously like regret. His eyes dropped to her rounded belly, and he paled, the realization crashing over him like a wave. "Olivia," he whispered, reaching out as if to touch her, but she stepped back, her gaze icy and unyielding. That night would be a turning point, a moment when Olivia would realize just how far she'd come and how much further she was willing to go. The restaurant buzzed with the soft hum of conversations and clinking dishes, yet to Olivia, it felt like everything had come to a standstill. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her fingers clenched around her serving tray as she forced herself to maintain her composure. Nathan's shocked expression lingered in her mind, along with the way his gaze had fallen to her swollen belly. The intensity of the moment pulsed in her veins, a reminder of just how far she'd come since that rainy night he'd cast her out. Yet here he was, sitting with Amber, of all people, at her workplace, a place she'd built from nothing, a place she could call her own. As Olivia served tables that evening, she was aware of Nathan's lingering stares from across the room. Amber, with her saccharine smile, seemed unaware, laughing and tossing her hair, basking in Nathan's attentions. But Nathan's eyes drifted repeatedly back to Olivia, as if he couldn't quite comprehend the sight of her here, working, thriving, visible proof that she had moved on without him. Finally, as her shift neared its end, Nathan rose and approached her. His presence filled the room, his steps purposeful and determined as he came to stand before her. Olivia straightened, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve, even as memories stirred like ghosts between them. "Olivia," he began, his voice a mix of disbelief and something she couldn't quite place. "Can we talk?" "Talk?" she repeated, her tone icy. "Now you want to talk? Funny how it didn't seem so important the night you threw me out in the rain." He flinched, the impact of her words evident in the tightening of his jaw. For a moment, the Nathan she'd once known flickered beneath the hardened exterior, the man who'd held her hand, who'd promised her a lifetime of love and companionship. "Please," he said quietly, almost pleading, "just 5 minutes." Against her better judgment, Olivia nodded, leading him to a quieter corner of the restaurant. She crossed her arms, keeping her expression guarded, and waited. He seemed at a loss for words, his gaze flickering from her face to her rounded stomach. "Is it mine?" he asked finally, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Yes," she replied, each word a deliberate act of courage. "Not that it's any of your concern." The weight of her words settled between them, a wall built brick by brick from the pain, betrayal, and resilience that had defined her journey. For a moment, Nathan looked like he might say something, but then Amber appeared, her expression dark with jealousy as she took in the sight of them together. "Nathan," Amber hissed, tugging at his arm, "let's go. We don't need to stay here." But Nathan's gaze remained on Olivia, conflicted, searching. The man who had once discarded her so easily now looked at her with a mixture of remorse and regret, emotions he couldn't quite mask. Olivia turned on her heel, leaving Nathan and Amber behind without a second glance. She had work to finish and a life to rebuild. She would not let herself be dragged back into the web of his choices. In the weeks that followed, Olivia found solace in the routines of her job, the steady rhythm of hard work and quiet determination that had become the backbone of her life. She bonded with her fellow servers, shared jokes with the kitchen staff, and even earned the respect of Sarah, who became something of a mentor, offering support and advice during the long, exhausting shifts. "Olivia," Sarah said one night as they closed up the restaurant, "I see something in you, a strength that goes deeper than most people realize. You're going to be just fine." Her words were a balm to Olivia's heart, a reminder that she was not alone, that she was stronger than the pain Nathan had left her with. Each day brought her closer to the woman she was becoming, a woman who was resilient, capable, and fiercely independent. And then, one afternoon, Olivia received a visitor at the shelter, a man in a tailored suit with a polished demeanor that spoke of wealth and power. He introduced himself as Marcus, one of Nathan's former business partners, and asked if they could speak privately. "I wanted to apologize on behalf of Nathan," he began, his expression sincere. "I didn't know he'd handled things this way with you." Olivia regarded him with a mixture of caution and curiosity, sensing an undercurrent of concern in his words. "Why are you here, Marcus?" Marcus sighed, running a hand over his neatly combed hair. "Nathan has changed, Olivia. He's become reckless, driven by ambition and blinded by success. I tried to warn him, but he won't listen to anyone." Olivia's heart tightened as she listened, recognizing the man Marcus described, an echo of the Nathan she'd once loved, now twisted by greed and arrogance. She nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure as she realized she was finally free from the burden of trying to understand or save him. "Thank you, Marcus," she said quietly, "but I've moved on. Nathan's choices are his own, and I won't let them define my life anymore." Marcus nodded, his expression one of quiet respect. "I thought you should know," he said before leaving. "Sometimes it helps to see things from the outside." In the weeks that followed, Olivia's pregnancy became more visible, and with it, her determination grew stronger. She was building a life, one that was hers alone, and that realization filled her with a pride that Nathan could never take away. As the restaurant buzzed with patrons one evening, Olivia spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Nathan sitting alone, his gaze searching the room as if he were looking for something he'd lost. His appearance was different now, a shadow of the confident man she'd once known, replaced by someone weighed down by the consequences of his own ambition. He watched her with a look that was part admiration, part regret, and Olivia felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite place. She'd moved on, she reminded herself. She was stronger now, and nothing he said or did could change that. Yet when her shift ended, Nathan approached her again, his expression one of quiet desperation. "Olivia, please," he said, his voice soft. "I was wrong. I let my ambition blind me, and I lost everything that mattered." She studied him for a long moment, feeling a mixture of anger and pity as she took in the man he had become. "Nathan," she said finally, her tone firm but compassionate, "some things can't be undone." He nodded, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. "I know. But I want to be part of our child's life. Olivia, I don't want to make the same mistakes twice." Her heart softened slightly as she considered his plea, the sincerity in his eyes stirring a compassion she hadn't expected. But she knew better than to let her guard down completely. "This isn't about us," she said quietly. "It's about what's best for the child. If you're serious, you'll have to prove it, Nathan. Words won't be enough." Nathan nodded, his expression solemn as he took in the weight of her words. "I'll do whatever it takes, Olivia. I just want a chance to be there for you and for our child." She didn't respond right away, letting his words hang in the air as she considered the possibilities. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him, to hope that he had changed. But she knew better than to let hope blind her to the realities of the past. As she walked away, Olivia felt a strange sense of peace, a sense of closure that had eluded her for so long. She was no longer the woman who had clung to Nathan's promises, nor was she defined by his choices. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever the future held. But life, she knew, had a way of testing even the strongest of souls, and she had a feeling that her journey was far from over. The air was electric in LeBlanc that evening, buzzing with the warmth and laughter of patrons savoring their meals. Olivia moved through the tables with practiced ease, her hands steady, her steps measured. But beneath her calm exterior, a storm was brewing, one she'd worked tirelessly to keep at bay. It had been weeks since Nathan's last visit, and she'd allowed herself to hope he'd finally accepted her boundaries and moved on. She had her own life to build now, one that didn't hinge on his regrets or the shadows of the past. But as she approached one of the corner tables with a fresh round of drinks, her heart nearly stopped. There, seated with her back turned to the rest of the room, was Amber, her laughter cutting through the air like shards of glass. Across from her, Nathan sat, his face taut with tension as he glanced around the room, clearly uncomfortable. Olivia's stomach twisted as she realized they hadn't just chosen her restaurant for a casual night out. They were here for her. As Olivia set down the drinks at the neighboring table, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation. Amber's voice was syrupy sweet, laced with the kind of smug satisfaction Olivia had come to expect from her. "It's a shame, isn't it?" Amber purred, reaching across the table to take Nathan's hand. "Olivia thought she could just walk away and leave you behind. But you know better than that, don't you, Nathan?" She was always so limited in her thinking. Nathan didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the polished surface of the table. Olivia felt a pang of something, pity perhaps, or the faintest trace of empathy as she watched him struggle to maintain his composure. This wasn't the confident, self-assured man she'd once loved. He was a hollowed-out shell, burdened by choices he couldn't undo. Finally, he looked up, his eyes locking with Olivia's across the room. His expression was a mixture of regret and longing, a silent plea that cut through her resolve. For a moment, the room seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, bound by memories and the fragments of a life they'd once shared. But Olivia couldn't afford to let herself be drawn back into his world, not when she had come so far. Just then, Amber noticed the silent exchange, her eyes narrowing as she followed Nathan's gaze. She let out a derisive laugh, loud enough for Olivia to hear. "Oh look, it's the ex-Mrs. Caldwell still playing waitress. How quaint." Amber's words sliced through the air, harsh and pointed, designed to provoke. Olivia felt a rush of anger but forced herself to remain calm, meeting Amber's gaze with quiet defiance. "I prefer to think of it as honest work, Mrs. Caldwell," Olivia replied, her voice steady and composed. She could feel Nathan's eyes on her, the weight of his unspoken words pressing down like a stone in her chest. Amber's smirk faltered, but she quickly regained her composure, leaning back with a condescending shrug. "Oh, I'm sure. Some of us, though, don't need to scrape by waiting tables." The insult lingered in the air, a reminder of the divide that had grown between them, a divide marked by betrayal, ambition, and the choices they'd each made. But Olivia felt no shame, only a quiet pride that had become her anchor. Nathan cleared his throat, glancing nervously between the two women. "Amber," he murmured, a hint of discomfort in his voice, "that's enough." Amber rolled her eyes, feigning innocence as she placed a hand over her belly. "I'm only saying it like it is, Nathan. After all, she's the one who couldn't give you what you wanted." The words were a blow Olivia hadn't expected, a wound reopened in the harshest possible way. She wanted to turn, to walk away, to pretend none of this was happening. But she knew better than to let Amber's taunts break her. She was stronger now, fortified by the journey that had brought her here, by the life she was building one step at a time. With a calm she hadn't known she possessed, Olivia looked Amber square in the eye. "I'm proud of what I've built," she said quietly, her voice unwavering. "I don't need anyone's validation, especially not yours." Amber sneered, clearly taken aback by Olivia's calm defiance. But before she could respond, Nathan rose from his seat, his eyes fixed on Olivia with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. "Olivia," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, I need to talk to you. Alone." Olivia hesitated, every instinct warning her to refuse. But there was something in his eyes, a depth of regret, of longing that stirred a part of her she'd tried to bury. Against her better judgment, she nodded, leading him toward a secluded corner of the restaurant where they wouldn't be overheard. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words, as they stood facing each other. Nathan's gaze was heavy, his expression one of raw vulnerability she hadn't seen in years. "I was wrong, Olivia," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was so blinded by ambition, by my need to prove something to myself, that I didn't see what I was throwing away. Us. Everything that mattered." His words were like a crack in the armor she'd built around herself, a chink that let in the light of emotion she'd tried so hard to keep at bay. But she couldn't afford to be swayed by sentiment, not now. She had her own life to think of, her own future to protect. "I appreciate the apology, Nathan," she replied, her voice measured. "But it doesn't change what happened. You made your choice, and I've made mine." He reached out, his hand trembling as it brushed her arm. "Please, Olivia. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. I just want to be part of our child's life. I don't want to make the same mistakes twice." For a moment, she looked into his eyes, seeing the man he'd become, the man who, despite his flaws and failures, was trying to make amends. And though her heart ached with the weight of all they'd lost, she couldn't deny him this chance. "I'll consider it, Nathan," she said finally, her voice soft. "But you have to prove yourself not to me but to our child. Actions speak louder than words?" Nathan nodded, his expression solemn as he took in the gravity of her words. "I'll do whatever it takes, Olivia. I won't let you down again." As they parted ways, Olivia felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, a sense that she was finally in control of her life. She'd faced her past, confronted her pain, and come out stronger on the other side. But the peace was short-lived. Only days after their conversation, news broke that Amber had leaked confidential documents from Nathan's company, sparking a public scandal that rocked the business world. Accusations of fraud and corruption surfaced, and Nathan's company faced imminent collapse. The fallout was swift, brutal, and merciless, leaving Nathan's empire in ruins. When Olivia heard the news, she felt a complicated mix of emotions: satisfaction, relief, and a pang of sadness for the man she'd once loved. Nathan's downfall was a stark reminder of the price of ambition, of the dangers of letting power consume everything in its path. As she watched the events unfold, Olivia found herself at a crossroads, caught between the past and the future, between the life she'd once shared with Nathan and the life she was building for herself. But in the end, she knew there was only one choice that mattered. With quiet determination, she focused on her work, her growing baby, and the future that lay ahead. Nathan's choices were his own, and she had her own path to follow, one that was defined not by regret, but by hope, resilience, and the promise of a new beginning. Days passed in a blur of news headlines, scandal reports, and public outrage. Nathan Caldwell's empire, once a symbol of success and ambition, was now the center of controversy, dissected and analyzed by news anchors and business experts alike. Olivia couldn't help but notice how swiftly the world that Nathan had built so meticulously, so ruthlessly, was unraveling before him. At first, she had tried to block it out, focusing on her work at LeBlanc and her growing child. But as more details emerged, the shock of Nathan's predicament was impossible to ignore. Amber, the woman he'd once chosen over her, had betrayed him in a way that cut deeper than even Olivia could have imagined. She had leaked sensitive documents, exposing Nathan's questionable dealings and ensuring that every corner of his empire was under scrutiny. As Olivia learned more, she found herself in an unexpected state of turmoil. Part of her felt vindicated, even relieved, by Nathan's downfall. His choices had come back to haunt him in the harshest way possible. But another part of her, a part she hadn't anticipated, felt an odd pang of sympathy. Despite everything, Nathan was still the man she had loved, the man with whom she had shared dreams, laughter, and promises. One evening, just as the restaurant was beginning to close, Olivia received an unexpected visitor. Nathan stood in the dim light of LeBlanc's entrance, his face pale, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. He looked nothing like the confident, powerful man she had once known. He was a shadow of his former self, his eyes tired, his expression one of quiet despair. "Olivia," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I know I don't deserve your time, but please, can we talk?" She hesitated, caught between resentment and compassion, between the memories of the man he had been and the wreckage of the man he had become. Against her better judgment, she nodded, leading him to a quiet table near the back of the restaurant. Nathan sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly together, as if clinging to some last shred of dignity. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I let ambition consume me. I let it ruin everything that mattered, everything that was real." The words hung in the air, heavy with regret and vulnerability. Olivia watched him, her gaze steady but softened by the sincerity in his voice. She could see that he was truly broken, that the man before her was one who had been humbled by his own actions. "Nathan," she said quietly, her tone gentle yet firm, "I forgave you a long time ago, not for you, but for myself. Carrying anger would have only kept me stuck in the past. I've moved on." A flash of gratitude flickered in his eyes, mingled with a sadness that seemed to weigh down every word he spoke. "Thank you, Olivia," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "But I don't just want forgiveness. I want to be better. I want to be there for you, and for our child." Olivia's heart softened, but she remained cautious. She had come so far on her own, had built a life that was strong and resilient, a life she could be proud of. Letting Nathan back into her life was not a decision she could make lightly. "If you want to be a part of our child's life, Nathan," she said finally, her voice steady, "you're going to have to prove that you've changed. Words are easy, but actions, those are harder to fake." He nodded, his gaze earnest. "I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes, Olivia. I don't want to be the man I was. I want to be someone our child can look up to." There was a sincerity in his voice that she hadn't heard in years, a raw honesty that stirred something within her. But Olivia knew better than to let sentimentality cloud her judgment. Nathan had a long road ahead, and only time would reveal whether he could truly change. Over the next few weeks, Nathan made a visible effort to rebuild trust. He attended counseling sessions, worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by Amber's betrayal, and most importantly made a genuine effort to be present in Olivia's life, though on her terms. He came to doctor's appointments, helped her with household tasks, and even offered support as she navigated the challenges of balancing work with her pregnancy. Through it all, Olivia remained cautious, observing his efforts with a watchful eye. She wasn't ready to let her guard down completely, but she couldn't deny that he was trying truly, wholeheartedly trying. One evening, as they walked home together after a particularly intense doctor's appointment, Nathan broke the silence with a tentative question. "Have you thought about a name?" he asked, his tone hesitant, as if he were afraid of overstepping. Olivia smiled softly, a warmth spreading through her chest as she considered the question. "I have," she admitted, glancing at him. "I was thinking about the name Michael. It was my father's name, someone who taught me the importance of kindness and resilience." Nathan nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Michael," he murmured, testing the name on his lips. It's perfect." In that moment, Olivia saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved, a man capable of tenderness and humility, a man who, perhaps, could still find redemption. But she knew that their journey was far from over, that there were wounds that time alone couldn't heal. As the due date drew closer, Olivia found herself navigating a delicate balance between independence and acceptance. Nathan's presence in her life had become steady, a quiet support that she had come to appreciate, though she was careful not to rely on him completely. She was determined to be strong, to raise her child on her own terms, to be the mother she had always wanted to be. Then, on a stormy autumn night, Olivia went into labor. The pain was intense, a force that ripped through her with each contraction. But she held on, her mind focused on the life she was about to bring into the world. Nathan was by her side, his face pale but determined as he offered words of encouragement, his hand a steady anchor in the chaos of the delivery room. After hours of labor, Michael was born, a tiny, fragile bundle of life that filled Olivia's heart with a love she hadn't known was possible. She held him close, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered words of love, promises of protection, and dreams for the future. Nathan watched, his own eyes wet with tears as he gazed at his son, the weight of his responsibility settling over him like a solemn vow. He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched Michael's tiny fingers, and in that moment, Olivia saw a glimpse of the man he was striving to become. For the first time in months, a sense of peace washed over her. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if Nathan would ever truly redeem himself, or if their paths would remain intertwined. But for now, she was content to let the moment unfold, to allow herself a glimmer of hope amid the uncertainty. As the weeks passed, Nathan continued to show up, proving his commitment not just through words but through actions. He resigned from his company, distancing himself from the ambitions that had once defined him, and instead poured his energy into helping Olivia build a future for Michael. Together, they opened a small cafe called Sweet Beginnings, a place where they could start anew, unburdened by the shadows of the past. Olivia knew that her journey was far from over, that there would be challenges and heartbreaks along the way. But as she looked at Nathan holding Michael in his arms with a quiet, reverent smile, she felt a spark of hope, a promise of something new, something real. And for the first time in years, Olivia allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a fresh start, a life built on trust, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. The cafe, Sweet Beginnings, was a warm haven that thrived in simplicity. Its walls were adorned with soft, earthy tones and delicate, hand-painted vines that Olivia had insisted on, and sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating shelves lined with fresh baked pastries and loaves of bread. The air was rich with the smell of coffee and spices, and the gentle hum of conversation filled the space with life. It was everything Olivia had dreamed of, an honest, welcoming space that she and Nathan had built from the ground up, together, though it wasn't always easy. Nathan moved quietly behind the counter, a newfound humility in his every gesture as he worked to serve customers, clear tables, and help wherever he was needed. He had shed the polished corporate exterior that had once defined him, replaced now by a man content in quieter things, a man learning to rebuild one day at a time. Olivia observed him from across the room, a strange warmth filling her chest as she watched him interact with customers, his smile genuine, his manner unassuming. It was a side of him she had not seen before, a man at peace with himself. Michael, now a few months old, lay nestled in a crib behind the counter, his tiny fists curled, his breathing steady and soft. Olivia would often glance over, her heart swelling with love and gratitude for this child who had brought so much light into her life. She'd built something new, something whole, a life unburdened by resentment and bitterness. One quiet afternoon, as the cafe began to empty, Nathan approached Olivia, his gaze soft, a question lingering in his eyes. They had settled into an unspoken rhythm, a balance that had grown from their shared commitment to Michael and their dedication to building this space. But she sensed that Nathan's heart held more, something that he hadn't quite put into words. "Olivia," he said softly, reaching out to touch her arm. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and saw in his eyes a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "I know it may be too much to ask, but do you think we could ever be more than this? More than just co-parents?" Olivia's breath caught in her throat, her heart fluttering as she considered his words. The man before her was not the same Nathan she had once known, the man consumed by ambition and pride. This was a man who had learned humility, who had faced the consequences of his choices and emerged wiser, gentler. She took a moment to collect her thoughts, her gaze drifting to the crib where Michael lay sleeping. The future she had envisioned for herself had not included Nathan, not after everything they had been through. But as she looked at him now, saw the sincerity in his eyes, she felt a shift within her, a cautious willingness to consider the possibility of something new. "Nathan," she began, her voice steady but gentle, "we've come a long way, and I appreciate everything you've done for Michael and me. But trust takes time, and I don't want to rush anything. Right now, I'm content with what we have, with the partnership we're building." A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he nodded, his expression one of quiet understanding. "I respect that. Olivia, I just want you to know I'll be here, no matter what. For you, for Michael, for whatever you need." Her heart softened at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest as she realized that, for the first time, she could see herself trusting him again. It wasn't a sudden rush of affection, but rather a slow, steady warmth that had grown over time, nurtured by his actions and the patience they had both learned to cultivate. Over the following months, Nathan continued to prove himself, not through grand gestures, but through quiet acts of consistency and care. He was there for every milestone, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. He became a steady presence in Michael's life, a father who was patient, loving, and devoted. One evening, as they closed up the cafe together, Olivia watched Nathan playfully cradle Michael, his face lit up with a smile she hadn't seen in years. Michael let out a soft coo, reaching up to touch Nathan's face, his tiny fingers curling around Nathan's thumb. It was a simple, tender moment, but it held a depth of emotion that Olivia couldn't ignore. She felt a sudden surge of gratitude for the man Nathan had become, for the family they had managed to create despite the odds. She hadn't planned on letting him back into her heart, hadn't thought she could ever forgive him enough to open herself up to that possibility. But as she stood there, watching him with their son, she realized that love, like trust, was something that grew slowly, gradually, each act of kindness and care building upon the last. As the months turned into a year, their relationship deepened, though they took each step carefully, mindful of the past they had overcome. They spent countless hours together, raising Michael, running the cafe, and rebuilding the trust that had once been shattered. It wasn't perfect, there were moments of tension, old wounds that would resurface now and then, reminders of the journey that had brought them here. But they faced those moments with honesty, with a willingness to work through the difficult emotions rather than bury them. Their lives became a blend of shared routines, laughter, and quiet moments of companionship that felt like home. Olivia began to see Nathan not as the man he once was, but as the man he had become, a partner who was steady, reliable, and compassionate. Her walls, once fortified by anger and mistrust, slowly softened, allowing room for a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Then, one warm spring evening, as they walked home from a late dinner with Michael nestled in her arms, Nathan paused under the soft glow of a street lamp. He turned to Olivia, his expression one of quiet determination. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady, "I know this may sound sudden, but I need you to know how much you mean to me. I don't just want to be here for Michael, I want to be here for you too. I want to build a life with you, a real one, with all the ups and downs, all the joys and struggles." She looked up at him, her heart racing as she absorbed his words. For so long she had guarded herself, had kept her heart locked away to protect it from the pain of the past. But as she gazed into his eyes, she felt a wave of peace wash over her, a sense of certainty that, despite everything, they had found their way back to each other. With a soft smile, she reached up, placing a hand on his cheek. "Nathan," she murmured, her voice filled with quiet conviction, "I want that too. I want a life with you, not because I need you, but because I choose you." In that moment, as they stood under the starlit sky, Olivia felt the final piece of her heart fall into place. The past, with all its pain and regret, was behind them, a chapter they had both learned from and left behind. Together, they would build a future defined not by ambition or resentment, but by love, trust, and the strength of a family they had created against all odds. As they walked home hand in hand with Michael nestled between them, Olivia felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had found her way back to herself, back to the life she had always deserved. And with Nathan by her side, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with open hearts and unwavering hope.